This is an incredibly important bill that we're discussing tonight, and I sincerely hope that it will be allowed to progress. And I'd first like to open by commending the Together for Safety group, who have tirelessly pursued the issue of safe access zones so that women can access the vital health services they are entitled to without harassment or fear. In response to constant anti-choice protests and activities outside the family planning clinic and maternity hospital in Limerick, Together for Safety was founded, and they have meticulously documented the negative impacts that anti-choice protests are having on people. Abortion is legal in this country, and that is the democratic decision taken by the people of Ireland in 2018. Repealing the 8th sent out the very clear message that decisions taken by women regarding their bodies and their healthcare are a matter for them and their doctors and nobody else. In fact, my colleague Deputy Louise O'Reilly, in anticipation of protests, submitted amendments to the original Termination of Pregnancy Act, and at the time was given a firm commitment that if she withdrew those amendments, legislation would be swiftly followed. Yet women still wait. Ministers have changed, elections have taken place, and yet women still wait. All the while, protests continue. Even during the pandemic, protests continued. Together for Safety would have preferred that the Minister had delivered on the commitment to bring forward the legislation, but in the absence of such legislation and with the daily damage that's being done to women through these protests, they have come forward with their own legislation. And that's legislation that was drafted by a constitutional legal expert, Dr. Jennifer Kavanagh, and barrister Clean Ní Gallagher. The bill is also endorsed by the following groups and individuals: the Abortion Rights Campaign, Alva Smith, Alliance for Choice, Amnesty Ireland, Clare Arc, Clare Women's Network, Disabled Women Ireland, Donegal Arc, Dr Mary Faviour of Doctors for Choice, Dublin Well Women's Centre, the Irish Council of Civil Liberties, Kerry for Choice, Leitrim Arc, Limerick Feminist Network, Limerick Women's Network, the National Women's Council of Ireland, the Northside Family Resource Centre, Offaly Arc, Rape Crisis Midwest, Rape Crisis Network of Ireland, Rebels for Choice, Safe Ireland, Sligo Asking for Angela, Tipperary for Choice, and West Cork Rebels for Choice. It also enjoys the support from elected representatives in both houses and from across the political spectrum. And I would like to commend my colleague Paul Gavin for piloting its progress through the Oireachtas. And I think it's really important that we remember why this bill is so essential. It's not about stopping the right to protest. As an activist who wears the badge of serial protester with pride, I've taken part in many protests, here and both internationally. I've been tear-gassed at protests, and I led a high-profile campaign at the European level for the release of imprisoned protesters in Egypt. The right to protest goes to the core of my values, and it is the pillar of a democracy. The right to protest, however, does not confer a right to a captive audience. As a country, we have accepted this when it comes to polling stations. In fact, we accept that it's not appropriate for political badges and slogans to have any place where people go to cast their vote. Surely a person accessing healthcare should be afforded similar rights to those going to cast a vote. Women in Ireland have been treated with disrespect, distrust and disdain since the history of this state. Forcing them to run the gauntlet through protesters just so they can enter or leave a healthcare facility is nothing more than a continuation of that treatment, and it has a lasting impact. And don't take my word for it. Listen to the women directly impacted who've shared their stories with Together for Safety. One of the young women from the protest group stood at the traffic lights opposite the maternity hospital. She asked if I had an appointment. I presumed she was making small talk, so I said yes, I did. She told me that she and her friends were praying that no babies were murdered in the hospital that day and asked me why I was attending. I told her my visit was none of their business and they should move their protest to outside Leinster House and leave people to access healthcare. They were still there when I got out. I went over to them and told them they should be ashamed of themselves. They ignored me and shouted a decade of the rosary at me. I have left that hospital with my 2 bonny babies, but also with nothing after a D&C, and I exited through a side door with a wicker coffin in my arms. Passing the hospital itself stirs up a mixture of emotions. Since I've heard of these protesters, I've gone out of my way to avoid walking past the hospital. They would have added to my grief and heartache. The women of Ireland deserve peace. It's 2021 and we've had enough. I was going into my doctor for a routine checkup. They were outside her surgery and were chanting something like "Stop Abortions." I went in and said it to my doctor, and she said she'd call the guards, but they were there every morning that week and were upsetting patients. This is just a sample of the emotional turmoil that women are being put through on a daily basis. But it's not just the women accessing healthcare, it's the healthcare workers, it's the doctors, it's the nurses, it's the administrative staff. And is it any wonder then that not every maternity hospital and only 1 in 10 GPs are offering abortion services even after we repealed the 8th? The protesters know what they're doing. They know the chilling effect that their protests are having. They know exactly what they're doing. This is not about religious freedom. This is about curtailing women's freedoms. Nobody has ever stopped an anti-choice protest taking place in public places. I have countless teenage memories, as anybody who grew up in Dublin would, of walking across O'Connell Street and being accosted and having graphic leaflets pushed into your face by groups like Youth Defence. I've walked past similar protests on my way into this building and into the European Parliament. That's democracy, that's freedom of expression, and I'll defend the rights of everyone to exercise those rights, even if I fundamentally disagree with them. But what I won't defend is someone who has a right to access healthcare, including abortion services, having to go through distress, intimidation and emotional abuse in order to fulfil that right. And I think this is what this bill seeks to do. It seeks to find that balance that protects everyone's rights. And I hope that we can progress this bill tonight and that it will be allowed to pass through. Go on, Margaret.